I think we were last before the Transportation Committee this spring, early summer, after our public hearing late last winter regarding the Alden Road project. So what we're here today is to talk about what we found has been able to respond to the comments that were given at that meeting, and then go over the next steps. So the most common comments, as we talked about at the last meeting, were to reduce the proposed right-of-way acquisition, preserve the trees, and then there was also a lot of comments about reducing the 8-foot shoulder. Those were kind of the main three comments that we presented to you, and that we said we were going to keep continuing to try and address with our further engineering efforts. So what did we do? We went back and looked at using 3-to-1 slopes, both on the foreslope and on the back slope, throughout the entire corridor. If you recall, we started out with 6-to-1 slope, which is a lot flatter, and then we tightened that up in areas to try to minimize the impacts, especially with respect to residential properties. So this time around, we used 3-to-1, which is really the steepest that we would prefer to go. As far as the requirements go, that's the steepest we can go without starting to introduce guardrail in a lot of locations. We looked at the drainage, and at this point, given the current budget limitations and the fact that where we are in the project, all we did to look at drainage was ensure that the ditches had positive drainage. We didn't go back and redo the whole drainage analysis at this point, but we did make sure that the drainage would work. And then we also maintained that 8-foot proposed shoulder per the requirements that we've talked about before. We looked at the entire corridor. The area north of Illinois 173, after looking at it some more, there is no opportunity, or very little opportunity, to tighten anything up more than what was presented at the last public hearing. Given the different topography that area is north of 173, what we had before would kind of represents the best case scenario. So as far as moving forward, if we want to separate that part out and look at something different for that would be up to the committee. But for the purposes of the rest of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the area south of 173, as that was the area that we had the most concern. So when we started out, we had 150 parcels, 55 we classified as farmland parcels, 94 as non-farmland parcels. Focusing on south of Illinois 173, there's 110 parcels, and what we've gotten that down to with our reworked analysis and cross sections is we're impacting now 24 parcels out of 110. When we started this process, years ago, we were impacting every single one of those parcels. We subsequently have brought that down. We introduced curb and gutter on the section just south of 173 there. That brought that number down. And so this is, at the end of the day, we're looking at 24 total parcels, 18 of those farmland, and we define farmland as parcels that have crops planted along the frontage, and then there's 6 non-farmland parcels. This is the typical section that we showed you before as far as what we were looking to do. And in most cases, we stuck with this 3-to-1 slope. It's going to be a challenge to mow. We've heard a lot, different projects that we've done, as the steeper you get, the people that do mow that area, it is going to be steep. But when we look at putting that slope in, getting the ditch bottom, for the most part, we are able to keep the improvements within the existing right-of-way, which I think was something that has been continued to be voiced as a concern throughout the project. So from a drainage perspective, we talked to you before about having the potential for shoulder encroachment. There's a few instances where that may occur onto the shoulder. Without doing the full analysis of drainage, we won't know for sure exactly where all those areas are. The biggest thing that we anticipate going with this steeper slope design is that we are going to need variances from the stormwater ordinance, because before, with those flatter slopes and the wider ditches, we were able to get the required detention that we needed in those ditches. By tightening those up and not purchasing right away to make those ditches wider, We will have to look to seek some relief from the requirements of the stormwater management ordinance, so that we don't have to buy right of way for stormwater detention.
What would be the specific impact? The velocity of the flow and
as far as not providing detention, there's a couple things. The velocity, depending on the hydraulics and how everything works, would be a little bit, but it just basically be, where does the water go? If this ditch spills up and spills over into a farmland or somebody's yard or something like that for a short period of time, versus if we were able to actually build a facility to contain all that water and then slowly release it, it would. That's the main difference. And when you go through the variance process, and we do that on a lot of our bridges, you're basically weighing in all of the impacts of meeting the requirements of the ordinance versus not meeting the requirements of the ordinance, and different ways to mitigate that. And the public road development section is unique in that the big caveat with that is to the maximum extent practical. So that definition has a large range of interpretation as far as what's the maximum extent practical. If we need to take 20 feet of someone's property, is that maximum extent practical or not? So that's something that with this design we would have to move forward with.
These ditches are to keep water off the road?
The ditches are to take the water off the road and maintain the existing drainage patterns that are out there. I mean, you've got areas where water comes from one side of the road, goes into the ditch, goes down the ditch, goes across the road. So it's twofold.
You realize at this time there has never been water on that road. It can rain like crazy. There is never water on that road.
on the road itself.
And we're not saying that there's going to be water on the road.
Standing water on the road with the ditches as they are now.
That's because of the way it's designed to run off.
So
And keep it off the road and out from underneath the bed of the road so it lasts long.
It's also to reduce saturation of the base.
To direct it away from the road and the road base. This was discussed at the K. This was the fact that when they're looking for us to pull it in and not acquire more right of way for things like stormwater, this was part of the discussion. Are you there, Wally?
We did not have another CAG to go. We brought this to the Transportation Committee after the last public meeting.
Okay.
We've talked about different...
I just mean when the people from the CAG were sitting there talking, what they're asking for is us to reduce the impact of that area. There were no discussions about why we were looking at this sizable footprint?
Yeah, we've been talking about that from day one as far as the need for the drainage facilities. Those are the requirements that we needed to make all this work. Keep in mind too that before, with our ditches, we were looking at, the other reason for getting all the right of way was to get this ditch bottom below so that the sub base of the road would drain. We're not doing that anymore because we gave ourselves a limitation of do whatever you can to keep everything within that existing right of way. So in a lot of cases, instead of taking a ditch down so that the bottom was below the sub base of the road and then having to go back up and go in, 10, 15 feet into someone's property, we shallowed that ditch up and just made it have positive drainage so that we were able to meet the existing grade back within the existing right-of-way. This is all focused on trying to minimize the impacts outside of the existing right-of-way as much as we possibly could.
That's great. And not to put you on the spot, Diane's comment